Good evening. Welcome to the December 23rd, 2019 meeting of the Grafton Planning Board, the very last planning board meeting of the year.
Of the century, of the decade.
Of the decade, if you're counting decades, if your decade numbering is zero-based.
Of course it is. The 20s, the 30s.
One can be picky about arguing zero-based or one-based in considering years and centuries and decades and all that, but that's for another time.
I certainly hope so.
So, first item on our agenda, as always, is public input. If there is anybody here from the public who wishes to speak or bring the board's attention to an item that is not currently on the agenda, now would be a good time to speak up. And seeing no public in the audience, I think it's fair to assume that we have no public input. So, moving on to our reason for even having a meeting tonight, our action items. We have a draft decision for a major residential special permit at 11 Wheeler Road. I believe we have a draft decision has been circulated to the board and posted on the website and is printed on paper in front of us. So, any thoughts as we proceed through this? Ultimately, we're going to have to hold one or more votes on this.
Yeah, this is this one, okay. I'm trying to find somewhere in here, Joe, there was a couple of words, it must have been in a finding, that referenced land development policy.
Excuse me.
Which gets back to some of what we've been discussing.
So I think you're referring to coming down to F27, finding 27, where we talk about traffic flow, automobile, pedestrian safety, convenience, traffic flow, control access in case of fire catastrophe. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, somewhere you talk about planning. No, no, you actually had the words land development. It's in terms of policy, board policy.
Now, the word policy doesn't appear in the decision. I just did a search.
All right, well, maybe.
And there's no land development as two separate words in the
Yeah, all right. Then I mustn't have seen it. But I thought I did. There was, but basically, well.
So are you talking about F17 where it says towards the end, the applicant stated that the waiver did not create a hazard and that the site distance and stopping distance requirements are met. The board reiterated that the 600-foot separation requirement is tied to land development guidelines and that there must be public benefit associated with granting waivers?
Yes, that's exactly it. And I don't know why searching didn't find it.
Yeah, actually, I don't know why that didn't either.
Usually my searching fails because I spell it wrong. I thought the separation requirement is tied to land development guidelines and road network, the town road network development. Which I
Town
think-
road
and
development network
Remember the first?
design guidelines.
No.
I mean, because you're essentially you have with that. I mean, within the subdivision rules and regs, that's establishing guidelines for how to lay out a street network.
I just thought that it might be possible to put in road network in addition to land development, Because to some degree, land development seems to me, I've got some land and I start digging out there, you know, and I build something on it. But the road network is a broader thing. If my reading of where planning boards and that sort of thing came from was drawing maps. The city drew a map of what it wanted to have happen. I guess it's an official map or something. I've never actually seen it, but it gets referenced every here and there. That was the original planning thing, that we wanted to lay out our road, how we laid out our roads. So road layout is.
So, I mean, one thing I can do is say 600 foot separation is tied to land development and road network, and really we should probably say standards, not guidelines.
Yes. Or policy, I don't know, standards and policy, whatever.
Well, because
It
it's
is-
called subdivision rules and, regulations,
yeah.
which is then essentially are establishing standards for development.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so that's
I just made that change to F17.
tied to land development and road network standards. Yeah, I think that probably fairly accurately characterizes the sense there.
It's tied to land development. I don't know whether what we're doing is establishing a you know, it functions as a standard, but it's a policy that establishes a standard.
Well, I mean, it's
it's
established in
okay.
the subdivision rules
wanna
and
go.
regulations. So,
Yeah, one might get the sense that the term standard is something that's sort of
Yeah,
industry-wide as,
Yeah,
it's sort of like
you
industry
have to go to the
standards.
AASHTO book or, you know,
Yeah.
that sort of thing, and I don't, that's
Yeah,
not.
and this is strictly local. Yeah, this is
no, I mean, I can also policies.
local
also
land development and road network standards.
standards, policies.
Policies work
How
there,
about,
too.
I'd say policies and standards, then. I don't know, what do you think? Maybe standard, no.
Would it be helpful to use the word local there?
I don't, I'm not sure that's necessary. But now I just thought of the other thing that I wanted to do. Oh, does someone have the subdivision rules? Where we speak of the criteria for a waiver, and we talk about, a public benefit, is there a substantial or some word like that in there?
Okay, so this is under section 6 administration, variation, 6.1.1 waivers. A. Strict compliance with the requirements of these rules and regulations may be waived when, in the judgment of the board, such action is in the public interest and not inconsistent with the subdivision control law and with the purpose and intent of these regulations. B. Any such waiver must be made in writing by the board as part of their approval or amendment thereof. Otherwise, all requirements contained herein are deemed applicable.
Okay, good enough.
So the only other reference, and we went around this when we were dealing with issuing the special permit under the ridings, had to do with major residential developments and the provision that let me just get it. Is where the construction of all ways, interior streets, and utilities shall be in accordance with the standards specified in the subdivision rules and regs. The planning board is strongly encouraged to waive those sections of the subdivision rules and regs in the interest of good design if it determines that adequate access will be provided to all lots in the development by ways that will be safe and convenient for travel. Each development proposal is unique, and the planning board is encouraged to waive design standards for cartway width, curbing, right-of-way, dead-end streets, sidewalks, drainage, common drives, and to use 25 mile per hour design speed to establish engineering criteria for minimum grade, maximum grade, tangent length, reverse curve, and maximum grade. They specifically talk about all of those items. The one item you may have noticed, Bob, that is not there is it does not explicitly identify separation of streets.
Which means we're not encouraged to,
Correct. The one interpretation in this is that by codifying each of those standards that is encouraged to be waived, such as the design speed within a subdivision under the rules and regulations is essentially 30 miles per hour. By reducing it down to 25, it allows for tighter corners,
Yeah.
less roadway width, all of that. Steeper grades as well.
yeah, okay, good enough.
So one of the things, just to break any momentary silences, is rather than going through each finding, positive or negative, I don't know if it's better just to take a look specifically at waiver 1 and 2, look at the conditions to see is there anything that was codified that then is able to say influence that waiver, because in the board's last discussion there seemed to be difference of opinion as far as what constituted, say, a public value for granting the waiver. And one of the things that the board asked me to do was to come up with some language as it related to being more explicit as far as developing a plan to ensure that no encroachment into the open space, working with land trust, establishing signs, establishing deed restriction language, to basically try to protect that as more of a permanent buffer. So that was sort of like the main guidance that I got as far as trying to formulate the decision. And before we go back and we start making positive findings, and then maybe considering waivers, maybe
Yeah.
just sort of
No,
spinning around those two things.
I'm still not persuaded that the open space is an adequate motivation or justification for giving giving the waiver on the intersection distances. I just don't think it's even close for me to the kind of benefit that I'd look for.
Open space, the way I understood was it was open space plus the construction of the walkway or the trail. So it'll be sort of semi-permanent trail that would be constructed, right?
My understanding was towards the end that because originally we had talked about some sort of walkway, and I thought that was pulled back because of the fact that It would be temporary in nature as far as being exposed to wet environments. It wouldn't last that long, and then it becomes an issue as far as the land trust maintaining that going forward. And I thought that ended up being pulled back as far as a requirement
Yeah.
from the board.
That's
So that's why it's not reflected in here.
that's my understanding as well. From what the discussion that I recollect there was that yes, he did kind of offer the walkway, but Robert Aberg from Land Trust basically expressed that it wasn't as much of a win as we thought it might have been because of that limited time, but that the applicant and the Land Trust were both willing to work with each other to figure out a agreeable solution between them on what could help improve that path, that area. But that wasn't, we didn't know what that would be as a board, so it's hard to really
Yeah.
say at this point.
I'm not at all sure that that sort of adjustment would be enough to tilt me over the other way anyway, but in any case, we don't have something that, well, we don't have anything that's convincing me.
I think my problem somewhat echoes that there's already a trail there, and I don't see that this is going to improve the situation any. And we're giving a waiver where we're really not getting any assurances from anybody that what is being given over to the land trust or to whomever is going to be a maintained and an accessible, any better access than it has already. And that's a problem for me.
The other part of that for me though also is, okay, I think we're adding a little bit of land to the land trust, but given the overall picture of that, it's people's backyards, basically. You're taking a little bit out of people's backyards and not really adding anything significant.
Yeah, what was in the conditions as drafted? Did any of that help that concern about people's backyards for you? Even if it doesn't tilt the scales, just
No. How much, if you've got, how many acres does the land trust have? 20, 30, 40 acres. You add 50 feet of strip on the edge, an acre or whatever it is, an acre or two. No, right against houses.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting part is where there's woods and lake.
yeah. My understanding of that as well, though, is that 50 feet could be in some parts of where the trail is. I know you've rocked it probably with that. It's extremely muddy, and you basically encroach on the property itself in order to cross reasonably.
But I didn't think that the 50 feet I'm talking about is
Yes, that strip.
the south and west sides,
Yep.
not the river side.
For me, the biggest piece was on the riverside, and Justin was also talking about, right? We have been through that. There is no way it is an all season. It's even during a good non-winter season. It is something you do encroach into the private property. That's the only way we can navigate that trail to reach to get to the other side of the land trust land. That's the only way it was to work. My understanding or what I took away was that putting in wooden planks or something for the walkway was not a viable solution because that would rot and that give away and maintenance was going to be tough. But I thought they were also going to make it more semi-permanent, or they were going to work out some mechanism to make it more semi-permanent wherein they would dump some boulders or something, apart from the fact that they would give additional width to the trail going into that land trust area.
But there's
Wasn't there-
nothing in this that does that.
Wasn't there something discussed at some point about, although the idea of constructing a was it a wooden walkway or something, turned out to be really not practical. Wasn't there something that was going to improve the trail somewhat to the extent that it was likely to be less muddy?
Right.
Well, having the extra land allowed for it to maybe be moved away from some of those areas.
Yeah,
But there was a lot of, well, it's a discussion point. We can talk about what could be done. The challenge is that, let's say where it was wet, they were going to move it 15 feet over to make it drier. Does that do it for you? I mean, the board could make a requirement that within an area that essentially was more inundated, that was more of a concern, that any sort of plan also needs to make sure that there's an alignment to eliminate a seasonal muddy season for trail users. We don't have anything as a proposal outside of, well, we could examine it further.
Yeah.
If it,
Yeah,
you know, and one of the things I'm trying to think as far as, you know, when you talk about public benefit, if we didn't have the 600 feet issue, if there was no waiver that was being required, the as of right development would be the same 6 lots under conventional and flexible. So there's nothing, it's not like they were proposing 8, pulled it back to 6 and said, here's what we're coming in with. The proof plan, the conventional and the flexible are the same. So the fact that a waiver is needed, there's not like that recognition, say, you know, the board had asked about affordable, or if we reduce the number of lots, if all of a sudden 3 of the lots in the rear weren't built as directly given to the land trust, that may be more of a counter as far as like there's more of a sizable public benefit, but we don't have that here. The only thing we have is basically the open space that's required for the flexible development would just be transferred to the land trust.
They pick conventional or flex?
Flex.
Okay,
I'm saying the
Flex-
proof plan number is the same as a
Yeah.
flexible number.
flex requires open space out of the backs of the lots, and I'm not sure that, we'd have to look at the maps, but we should be gaining space anyway, but, you know, as far as like someone who needs to go up a little bit up, uphill is gonna be in, land that's for conservation, that's, should be available to the public anyway. So even if it isn't, turned over.
there's another kind of problem. I guess if somebody had really had a plan, and even if it's the land trust, of how they would deal with a trail through there, because there is another issue that happens. When they build 6 houses, that means the hardscape goes up, which means that runoff into that area will increase. So what's muddy now will be muddier. That's the way it is. You know, water runs downhill. And you can be assured that open grass, which is what these houses will have, doesn't absorb as much water, not as much rain as we get. You know, and it will be wetter. So you really have to have a plan that shows a way to improve the access back to the land trust land. And I'm perfectly happy with that, but we don't, you know, they didn't, it's just sort of hand waving at this point. Is there a way we can require that in a final plan?
So the reason why I'm asking these questions is identify within the decision for a preliminary plan, and let's set aside the special permit for a second. Preliminary plan, whether you approve, you have 3 options: to approve, approve with conditions, or deny. They all allow you to go forward to definitive. It becomes a question as far as if there are things that, say, could be resolved or refined, then you'd be looking at an approval with recommendation saying, you know, there's the movement towards correct direction. However, the board is withholding approval and offering these conditions that then say you need to do X, Y, and Z when you come in for definitive. Denial ends up being the same thing essentially, because you can say, well, we deny it because it doesn't do this. But the reason why I'm asking it is there something that if they only did this, then we'd have 5 yeses with conditions? Or is it such that, you know what, even with that, you know, that's
Yeah.
still a challenge for the waiver? So
Yep.
just trying to frame the conversation.
So the sticking point here is the waiver and street separation.
Which,
Everything else is, I think, pretty much not going to be a problem.
The board, I mean, the only other waiver had to do with streetlights. The board already said, well, we're really not going to approve that. That's, you need input from the select
Right.
board. We'll
We've-
deal with
we've
that as
basically taken
definitive.
care of that.
Right.
So the point about the waiver of street separation is whether there is the prospect that with some additional work on their part, a majority of the board would be able to approve that waiver. And if in the board's best judgment now, there is absolutely no prospect of reaching a majority in favor of the waiver, then there's really no place to go with this.
So one of the challenges, unlike Gristmill Village, we were able to make sure that as part of their waiver for 600 feet, that they improved what had historically been a very glaring and at times dangerous site distance issue with Gristmill and Pleasant Street. So part of the reason why we granted a waiver was because of being controlled by the same property owner, that we were able to remove those to remove that safety issue.
but wasn't that incorporated in the special permit process?
Yeah.
And that's the point, you were just talking about preliminary subdivision plan,
So,
chapter 41.
yeah.
I'm talking about chapter 40.
So,
48.
and that's why I said just setting aside the special permit.
Yeah. The thing is that things in the preliminary subdivision plan, we get another bite at when they come back for definitive. We don't get another bite. This is when we have to decide about the special permit. And,
Just to ask out loud, what thought process I'm having is that we have talked about looking at different aspects of the subdivision rules and regs. Would that come into play if we did reduce the distance between the streets in our future discussions? Would would they, if we denied the waiver today, but reducing that distance, so they wouldn't need a waiver, then when they'd still be able to come back with a definitive?
If it should happen to
Yes.
come to pass that we do work on a revision to the subdivision rules and regulations, and we do collectively decide to modify the separation requirement in some fashion that allows them to maybe come into compliance with it, then if they were to bring in this definitive plan after we put such new rules and regulations into effect, there's a lot of ifs here,
Yes.
which is.
I'm gonna vote against the special permit. And that, the way that they would, if that's what happens, then if we change the rules, they need to file again for a permit, for the special permit as well as the subdivision process.
In other towns, what is a typical site distance
Site distance isn't,
or whatever?
Step roadway separations, right?
Roadway
That's what you're asking about.
That's where that gets to be a little bit more challenging because of the fact that not all towns will address that specifically as far as layout. Most often, towns will address street offsets, which you don't want. You want them either this or a minimum amount. The minimum amount in most of my research had been 125, 150 feet. But that's because they're looking at a safety movement that two cars coming in can get into a their own respective lanes and not create a conflict versus one car here, one car here. You have to go into oncoming if this one's coming out. While I had asked my fellow planners on the listserv if anyone had anything, I actually didn't get any responses. One of the challenges, though, in sort of saying what other standards are, is exactly the same as maximum length of dead-end street. This is a local design requirement that Grafton adopted. Yes, we don't have a document that says why, but the 600 feet is not something that many other towns have. It is a planning process for layout, orderly layout of streets. That's it. We already know it's not safety related. We've discounted that. Unless we are going 55 miles per hour, you do not need 600 feet to stop.
Well, except for the car that went into the pond there.
And they could have been following GPS and
Yeah, I mean,
No,
there's,
they skidded in.
yeah, I think that's really, that's sort of the crux of the matter is that right now, we are dealing with the subdivision rules and regs as they are written.
Yep.
And if you ask the six of us, because I don't want to leave Vikram out of this, he's been sitting here at least patiently listening, if nothing else. If you ask the six of us what we thought that parameter should be, you probably get six different answers and six different variations, because it's something for which we don't really understand why the rule was adopted, but we have to deal with the rule as it is, and we have the authority to waive the rule. We are always reminded when we think about waivers is that every time we do approve a waiver, we're setting a precedent of sorts. And, hence, we want to have some reasonable justification for granting the waiver. In the case at hand, the only justification we have, the only thing that we can say about granting the waiver is with reference to, the rules and regs where, there has to, we need to find that there is a public benefit that goes along with granting this waiver. And the discussion to date has not surfaced a public benefit that five of us will agree is justifies this particular waiver. Some of us I know are willing to grant the waiver with whatever level of public benefit we have. We have some discussions about some potential solidification or strengthening of the public benefit that's been under discussion. But I don't think we're at a point where I'm confident that a majority of the board would vote to grant the waiver for the public benefit as it is known today.
And just for clarity, just because words and nomenclature can be important, we really need to be talking about in the public interest, not public benefit.
interest.
Public benefit basically means that you could quantify and put a dollar figure on it. Interest can be
It's broader.
monetary, right? It's
It
broader.
doesn't- not
There's
necessarily quantifiable.
correct.
Well,
You just have a point of information where,
I was going to say we're not at 10 o'clock yet.
no, not a point of order.
We better not go to 10 o'clock tonight.
no,
Like the-
we plan to be out of here real fast. We're gonna eat afterwards.
I live basically at the corner of Garden Street and Crescent Street. The street distances around me, of course, these are much older part of town, are roughly 300 feet between streets to a corner. Some of them are even a little bit shorter than that. I just figured it was worth mentioning where it was asked like how other areas are, but
Yes, there are many areas of Grafton
Yes.
whose development predates the subdivision rules and regs, so,
Exactly.
and they don't. When those rules were created, we did not somehow magically go around and get the whole town to conform to them.
No.
That's kind of
sure.
impractical.
Right.
So that, and, you know, there are some, you know, there are various considerations that can kind of go along with this.
Yep.
Again, how do we deal with this under today's rules?
Yes.
We certainly have an interest in revisiting the subdivision rules and regs for more reasons than just this. And this would be certainly a good point for discussion as we do get into those subdivision rules and regs. But that's sometime in the future.
Yeah.
And did I understand one of the points you were making earlier about maybe denying this special permit, and then when they refile, if they were to refile, they could do so under new rules?
If there were new rules when they
If there were new
filed,
rules. Yes,
you can give or take the 2-year rule, but it depends on, you know, whether their plan is, if the board will let them. The board doesn't have to
Yes.
let them for 2 years, I think, sort
right.
of, right?
We can allow it, but
Unless,
we don't-
I mean, if the board determines that the application has changed substantially. I mean, that's-
Substantially,
That's actually for the board to determine.
right. Because the application presumably would not have changed that much, but we could still determine
Yes.
that it
Yeah,
was
so-
a significant change.
Right, so one of the things we are contemplating is roughly the same application, but under an updated subdivision rules and regs. And now, in order for that to be practical for the applicant, would that require us to deny the special permit today? Because if the special permit was approved and the preliminary plan was denied, a future definitive plan still sort of is under the umbrella of the special permit, right? Or not? I
Say
guess
that
it-
again, if the special permit is,
Right, so if we were to, one of the options I think Joe gave us was to approve the special permit but deny the preliminary plan.
actually, that's happened
I think we-
some number of times.
Yes.
And they did pay no attention to the subdivision, the preliminary
Yeah,
denial.
because in essence, the preliminary plan is sort of, yeah, it can be ignored when you come
Why-
back to the definitive.
There must be some other place in Massachusetts where it makes sense to have this preliminary plan thing. I've always encouraged, not necessarily for subdivision, but just anything when people are coming, come talk to us first. And we'll get on try to get on the same page before we, that's basically what happens with a preliminary subdivision. In places that don't have special permits for major residential.
Well, you have to remember that because of the Westwood case, no town that has adopted flexible development bylaws in the last 10 years has a special permit process. The courts invalidated it. But ours has been on the books for 25 years, and no one's challenged it.
You know,
That's why it's still here. It's not because of that it's
you said that was for flexible. Yeah, that our rule goes back to before we had flexible.
So the state, and this was back in 2009, the state had been pushing a model open space development bylaw. Within it, they had included a special permit process very similar to what we have. And I know this because Natalia and I, when we were in Millville, we adopted in front of town meeting when it was at the AG. That's when the Westwood case happened, and our open space bylaw actually got turned back to us saying was denied, and the AG wouldn't approve it because of the Westwood. We then revised our open space development bylaw to make flexible developments by right, so that the only approval that was needed was preliminary plan. The reason is that the courts identified you can't mix and match subdivision control law and Chapter 40A, which requires special permits, because they are totally separate and autonomous sections of the bylaw. So that you can't, something where regulations are supposed to adopt and allow for the development of subdivisions by a standard, you can't introduce another area. We can't I just say that so that you're aware that no other town could adopt our bylaw.
Now,
Right. We only have our bylaw, and it's only here while no one appeals it. Under that Westwood. So you are correct that we've approved a special permit but denied a preliminary, but the denial of waivers of that basically meant that they couldn't go forward. I'm talking about Grafton Hill. They had that 22 lot subdivision from 1955 in their back pocket. So they didn't have to sort of pursue it anymore. I only say that as we go through to identify that when we issue a decision, if you approve a special permit, that means there's something that could be done to meet the findings within 5.3.8, talking about that it's in harmony with the existing probable future uses, that on balance, the project is more beneficial than the development likely would be without the approval, that it is objectives of this bylaw of the major residential development, including but not limited to existing and probable future development, appropriateness of proposed layout of lots, and those things. So I'm just saying that just so that we're sort of aware as far as like as we consider a decision, just those provisions, so that for anyone that, and Justin, thank you for pointing out, existing neighborhood you live in. I just brought this up on GIS. This is the Power Line Sunset subdivision,
yes.
where then this was an orderly sort of layout of subdivision roads, and you're looking at anywhere from 338 feet between streets that are adjacent to 418. So you're talking like here 417 is 3 homes. You're probably talking then a span of 5 homes would then be that 600 feet. That definitely is a planning design standard. The subdivision rules regs talk about 600. You should plan for a next street at 1200, so you maintain an orderly design pattern.
I seem to recall discussions in years gone by that other towns did have similar rules. I know we had that discussion about the dead end lengths. It was fairly common when those rules were being adopted to go with those standards.
They do have
It was
those.
before me. Yeah, actually, it was before me,
They do have,
just after the dinosaurs.
and you're right. Most towns have maximum length of dead end street. The difference is that many will have different standards. Millbury is 1,000 feet. Uxbridge has a standard that on any dead end street you can't provide frontage more than 20 homes. They don't do it as a distance. So those also vary in Wayland where I was. It was 750 feet was maximum length of dead end street. So those are also across the map. At least that's not a standard they're asking to waive here.
Yeah, right.
Thank God.
So, but in any case, what we might do, it looks to me like we better schedule a lot of time if we want to consider changing these rules. And I think we're spinning our wheels to talk about it tonight.
Right, I think it's for the purpose of tonight's discussion. We have a growing interest in updating our subdivision rules and regs for a number of reasons. And that's something that, cross my fingers and knock on wood, I will try to push forward on this board to do over the next few months. I mean, I don't know, things are always easier said than done.
Yes.
Just as soon as we get our new planner, what they can get right on, right?
Exactly. That'll be the only thing they'll be focused on.
So I do not know how quickly or how successfully we will be at it, but that is something I want to try to push because, you know, over the years, we've had a number of issues related to the subdivision rules and regs. Most notably, these two, the dead-end
Yeah.
streets and the street separation. You know, there are other, some of them are maybe more of a housekeeping nature, but, you know, it would be good for us to do it, and it won't happen unless at least one of us, you know, pushes kind of hard to make it happen, and that, today at least, I'm kind of motivated to do that. So there's at least a possibility that over the next few months, half a year maybe, could be longer, but who knows, we will actually end up updating this. Whether we end up with something that the Wheeler Road subdivision can fully comply with, or at worst, comply with a relatively with what looks to all of us like a minor variation. I mean, we're generally more comfortable with small deviations than we are with large ones. The one here is sort of large enough for some of us to be uncomfortable with.
Yep.
And so it's kind of a long-winded way of my saying that we have a prospect, though certainly not a certainty, that the subdivision rules will change in a way that makes it more likely for the board to be able to approve a subdivision plan similar to this. For the time being, that maybe we're looking for a way to deal with this in such a way that, yeah, maybe we can't approve it now if on the assumption that we don't have a majority that will vote for this particular waiver. That we can't approve this now, but you know, we want to try to find a way to dispose of this in a way that is not too big an impediment for the applicant to come back at a time when conditions are more favorable. Is that a good way to put it?
If we had a motion, I'd move the question.
You want to make a motion?
Well, I guess we're looking for, you know, what's the best way for
So-
us to put this to bed? Deny the waiver, deny the permit?
So I can understand the desire to say, hey, we've had enough of an issue with this that it warrants paying attention to it and looking to see what would happen. I think it becomes challenging when we say we deny a special permit and deny the waivers, and then the response is, we're gonna look to maybe revise the regulations, and maybe they will, maybe they may not be changed. That's where it gets a little bit challenging, because you're dealing with 315 feet from Worcester Street. So you're talking about half that distance. Whenever I think about laying out roads, I'm thinking about a number of things. I'm thinking about the zoning district, speed, all those things that are a little hard to sort of like quantify without doing some sort of study. And
But all of that is gonna come sometime in the future. We are where we are. And we're not going to incorporate a promise in this decision.
right, that's what I mean.
That's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can, you know, it'll be made known or will be recognized by the applicants and everyone that that's a circumstance, particularly because we've had a discussion about looking at the rule. And I think I don't think we're getting anywhere to keep talking.
Under the rules as they exist today, it's my perception that we do not have a majority of the board willing to grant this particular waiver.
Well, maybe we should find that out.
See, my problem is a little different. If we had a way to write into the decision conditions that could address the business of creating, of making sure that there's the access would actually improve and, would be a better sort of trail and stuff than it is now. And it's really somehow to have that be, the hand waving of that bothers me. I think that that's something that needs to be in this. That needs to be in the definitive. I don't care who does it, if it's the land trust or it's the property owner or whatever. But somebody has to be, that has to be resolved. To me, that's my major thing, not so much the 300, the other.
So,
Because that's a real benefit to the town.
so that sort of ties into the draft condition C2. C2 doesn't talk about the trail. That's the point that's made. C2 talks about
Exactly.
prior to the submission of a definitive plan approval, there will be an open space maintenance plan that proposes how the open space parcels will be protected from trespass and dumping. Applicant will work with town staff and representatives from the land trust to develop a plan that will include signage, deed restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. So that does address one of the concerns that was raised. It's all too typical, as we've seen, for open space that's been
So
dedicated to the public in one way or another to not be respected.
Exactly.
But there's another point that you're after. That is that let's talk about bringing into the definitive plan something specifically to improve the trail.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's
Something. Even if you do find that, would I then be convinced that it was worth the cost in the intersection situation?
so. I mean, that's ultimately that becomes the question. The waiver needs 3. The whole special permit needs 4. Bob, with all due respect, I'm just gonna assume, for argument's sake, right now, you're just a no. I'm just gonna assume
It
that.
might happen, yeah.
I'm not saying it will. I'm just for argument's sake. So one of the things that the board has said a couple times has been that the land development, the drainage system, even though they're shifting a little bit through a property swap, that there is still a concern that the trail itself is going to be negatively impacted in a way that either due to seasonal issues, rain events, or increased water, groundwater, that the trail is going to be negatively impacted. That in addition to a open space maintenance plan, a trail improvement plan should be submitted that allows that identifies how the trail could be elevated out of water and wet prone areas. I'm reaching here.
But the land trust.
I'm not talking about physically a deck.
No,
I'm talking about
but I think we explored.
Shifting it.
No, there isn't a shift that's going to really solve it. Get to a little bit drier land maybe, but my recollection was that it still wasn't gonna. There was, if there had been something solid there, our conversation would have gone differently. And basically, I think that they said it can't. It isn't there. You can't do it.
What I think I remember Robert Aberg saying on that point as well is that if the development is going in, what they are doing in the flexible plan as it stood was the best they can do. Getting the trail away from the brook more is going to improve it, but nothing is better than the development not going in as far as the trail is concerned. That's my recollection of what he said.
Pretty much.
The last part?
That
And that last part's what I don't remember Rob saying. I remember, and he said he was speaking not as the land trust, but as a resident, the gentleman up the hill. And I'm just blanking the name, though I have.
Ken Crater?
Yeah.
Oh,
I remember him saying
I
it.
thought it was Rob. I could be.
I don't
wrong.
remember Rob saying that.
It could have been Ken, because Ken was just basically in opposition to this whole development.
Correct.
So, Yeah, as you point out, Joe, it does not require a unanimous vote, either on the waiver or on the special permit or subdivision approval as a whole. It does require a majority, in the case of the waiver, 3 out of 5. A supermajority, 4 out of 5, to grant the special permit. If only one of us is sufficiently uncomfortable just to not vote for anything or not vote for the waiver, that's one thing. If a condition in the special permit, if a condition requires that more work be done, that a design be proposed to improve the trail in the ways that we've talked about, that would be required as part of the submission of the definitive plan. And if, as I understand it, the definitive plan would also require the same waiver, because it again is under the subdivision rules and regs, and the waiver is from one element of the subdivision rules. And if at the time the definitive plan comes in, the solution that they proposed is not satisfactory, the board has the opportunity to deny the waiver.
Yeah.
It's making the applicant do more work
And
and
that's
still
why
some risk.
that's why I had said prior to the submission of a definitive, so that the board will review and approve, because it's one thing to go back and look at the open space, and it's the last sentence. The open space maintenance plan shall be submitted prior to definitive plan application for review and approval by the board. Because it's one thing to go and focus on that and to come up with a plan, than to do all the soil tests, all the fine-tune engineering and stormwater and all of that stuff. And to at least resolve that so that people are happier as far as, okay, this is going to be a improvement, and that improvement could be, actually putting in, gravel and stone dust in order to improve drainage in the trail. I'm just throwing things out, Bob.
No, but we talked about that and established that that was really not viable.
I don't. I love to disagree on that, Bob. I didn't hear that was not going to be a viable option. So maybe I
thought
missed
I
out
did.
some part of it.
Well, I'm sure I did, but okay.
The only thing I remember not as a viable was building a boardwalk.
No,
yeah.
That was the only thing I remember saying, you know what, that's sort of like, okay, you just want a car. Now I have to pay the taxes on it and all this stuff. It's like, then it becomes a hassle for maintenance, and it's great for a couple years, and then those things become more problematic to maintain long term. But that's where if for members, there's like, you know what, this may not have been something we pursued or pushed enough to try to see.
Yeah, so what I think I hear you suggesting is that there's a possibility that, with respect to open space, as it's already written down here, and with respect to improving the trail, that's something that the applicant could bring to us before they've done all the,
And that's for members
the
that are
engineering
like
work.
on the fence.
Yeah.
We already know we're not going to get an affordable unit. We know they're not going to reduce down. If they came in and said, well, we're going to reduce it down to 5 lots. At that point, actually, then the special permit wouldn't be necessary, because they could come in straight with preliminary, and major residential comes in after 5 lots. But they're not doing anything like that. So the only thing we have is the open space that's currently in the plan and what could be done. So it's a rather fine subset. So if people are like on the edge, like, they just didn't go far enough.
do a little bit more here.
Yeah. What did they tell us would be the disposition of the flexible space,
To the land trust.
to the land trust? So the land trust will have that land that we're talking about, this trail going on. either way. And the only thing that the developer is putting into it is some stone dust, basically.
If that's what they
Yeah,
identify
you know,
as
or-
would
or-
be
or
structurally
crushed stone
address
or
the
something
muddiness.
like that.
Right.
It's not the land, it's just upgrading the trail. And that's just not very much, compared to what I see when I stand out there 300 feet up from Worcester Street.
Is land plus upgrading the trail, right?
No, but we get the land, if you approve, if you give them the special permit,
The land trust
then the
gets the
land trust will have the land
Okay.
regardless of whether they do anything for the trail. So what are they giving us? They're not, all they're giving us is a little bit of help grading a trail. And I don't see that overriding the road situation. Somebody slid down and nearly died in the river here a couple weeks ago on that street. You know, you saw that story. The intersection is already at level of service F. This will add traffic, even if it's a little bit of traffic. It's making a failed intersection even more failed. And I can't, I really need something better than some stone dust or crushed stone to balance it. And it's that simple. We've been an hour now.
And I think the new subdivision will also add traffic, right? I'm sure that's already.
The 40B Elm Rock, yep.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. How about the rest of us who are maybe on the fence? Would some specific trail improvements be sufficient to justify, in your minds, a waiver?
To speak for myself, I'm currently on the fence, but even without that, I'm leaning toward a vote in favor of the waiver. So I think having that added would be a stronger pull toward me for that.
I'm not sure what you're adding that
The-
makes it better.
That's also what I'm not 100% sure on. It's a matter of, I'm no trail expert as far as what can make that better in particular, but I would trust the members of Land Trust in particular to, give that feedback and say, yes, this is a way to make it better.
Now, supposing, for the sake of argument right now, supposing that a majority of us are willing to grant the waiver based in part upon the sort of a condition that says you're gonna come back and tell us how you're gonna improve the trail, as well as your open space plan and all that. Administratively, then, of course, it would make sense for them to get those into us before they proceed very far into the definitive. But how do they know that we've decided that that's good enough? That it could be kind of informal. They submit this, we go over it and we discuss it, and we tell them, yeah, we think this is good. When you come in with a definitive, you're going to have to be asking for a waiver of this rule. We can give you some feedback early to say, most of us are willing to approve this, something like that. I guess I'm not sure how we handle that
We'd have to-
administratively,
yeah.
and the applicant, it's to some extent at the applicant's risk until we actually approve the whole thing.
So from a process standpoint, this would be essentially its own requirement in advance of definitive subdivision, where they needed for the board to basically state that you are consistent with the board's decision. You are proposing something that is, one, going to work, which means that we would need not only input from Land Trust, we'd want input from Graves Engineering to say, okay, is this going to be stable enough, and is this going to reflect enough of improvement?
Wouldn't Concom also have to be involved in that?
That would be something that the board could identify with conservation, because the other thing is we could be requiring things that maybe conservation doesn't like.
Is it, in fact, has it been established that conservation would allow anything to be done? That's within, how far from, I don't know what the boundaries are of the.
Well, I mean, the one thing is that within the Rivers Act, you are able to put in recreation trails. You can even put in wooden structures for the purpose of trails. If you, right, we're not dealing with anything such as asphalt and all of that stuff that would be coming through here. So trails specifically is a permitted use within the wetland buffer areas.
And that's not a wetland,
Oh, they're all within wetland buffers. No, they potentially would have to go in front of conservation as well to get approval and all of that stuff. And you could say that you need to make sure that any necessary local approvals are obtained, prior to, say, a deliverable either at preliminary or, at definitive, or even prior to any commencement of construction, go through all the permitting. But again, it ends up being, is that enough to sort of tick it over? And for anyone that's on the fence, it's not only the waiver, but then it's also the special permit. So if we have a 3-2 on the waivers, we're then still looking at the special permit as far as the four that are needed. So,
Well, I absolutely require that to be, I'm certainly on the fence. I'm not happy about the sight distance. I think that's a dangerous
intersection
intersection.
distance.
I think that's, and I don't see it getting any better. I do agree it is an F, and that's unfortunate. If I could be persuaded that they really came up with a fine way to put a trail through that wasn't a soggy, muddy mess, and that it could be maintained, and that there's a real commitment to it, you might persuade me. But it's not going to be easy, because I've done an awful lot of hiking. And I just, and I also am concerned because we are in a wetland, and I don't know how the state of Massachusetts is, but I do know what it's like in Maryland, and by golly, they come down on you at the state level with hammers if you don't respect the wetlands, because the Chesapeake is so precious. So.
Yep.
So what do you think, Prabhu?
I was on the fence, but I see value that the way I read the whole situation is, if we didn't have in terms of the interest, public interest piece of it, if this didn't exist, we would still be using the private property to use that as a trail. We get land for the trail. In addition to land for the trail, we are also we should ask for, and I agree with Linda, that put something in writing as a condition that what is worked with, what needs to be worked with, to come up with a plan and define and say that this is how the trail would be upgraded and it would be maintainable. I'm not too sure, Linda, I don't think you were asking the developer to maintain the
No.
trail, right?
No.
Maintainable trail.
No,
is what
because once the land's turned over to the land trust,
Right.
it's their responsibility.
Right, we would,
But it needs a beginning. It needs that first development is absolutely critical to the longevity of a trail.
right, and that's what you're getting at is, and what I think several of us are thinking there is that what this developer might do to improve the trail, we would want to see that done in such a way that the land trust would be able to maintain the trail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not just a
That
hand
would not- That
waving.
maintenance would not be a burden on the land trust,
Exactly.
which is what the boardwalk would have been. You know, which is why everybody agreed that the boardwalk wasn't practical from a long-term perspective.
Maybe we should go ahead with, deny the waiver at this point. If the special permit is approved, they can move ahead and they can ask for a waiver when they're ready. Again,
Yes.
a second time.
That would be with the definitive, right? Or could
Yeah,
be
yeah,
earlier, but
well,
definitely, certainly with the definitive, if not earlier.
They might, I don't know, I suspect that they could come in, Joe could figure out how they could come in and get a vote on a waiver prior to doing all the engineering.
Modification of the special permit possibly.
Nah, well, maybe.
Anyway,
That's a modification.
so let's assume for the moment that that's a if Joe agrees that what we could do is we could deny the waiver, approve the special permit,
We'll take a vote on the
take
special
a
permit
vote on the special permit
and the subdivision.
in the subdivision, preliminary subdivision plan.
So,
I think that it doesn't matter what we say about the subdivision plan, and I'm gonna vote against it too because of the waiver, they don't have the waiver they need. And that we'll say that in one of the reasons. Move the question.
Joe is writing a new condition here.
I'm just trying to get things down in my head. What it involves is one, putting in a explicit finding that the board finds that the development of land, increase in impervious surface, removal of trees, increase in lawn areas, and the required construction of a detention basin will impact surface and water and surface and groundwater surface flows in a manner that could negatively impact the adjacent Grafton Land Trust land and trails, and then going into that they shall prepare a trail improvement plan to address access issues along the trail that are related to poor conditions due to water, which may likely be exacerbated through the development. That's where my stomach starts first trying to craft something.
I'm not sure, though, we're talking about denying the waiver, and then I'm not sure what this language is part of.
This would be a condition that basically supports why what they would need to do
Well,
prior to a definitive.
no,
So when you deny the waiver, let's say the board said, at this point, we do not have the information in front of us that supports this waiver. However, we will reconsider this waiver at a time as required in Condition 2. Condition 2 would then say, here's how then they could prepare a plan for review by the board for them to reevaluate that waiver prior to submission of a definitive. Otherwise,
so moved.
so for, I'll second, but I do have a question.
we have to
I move the
second-
question.
We have to second in order to have a discussion.
I move the
My-
question.
So we are able to, just to make sure I understand this correctly, able to deny the waiver, we'll deny both waivers, but still approve the special permit for the condition
vote
two.
on the
Yeah.
waiver.
Yes. There's only one waiver. I mean, there are two waivers, yes, but
And we have to act on
we're,
both.
we have to act on both of them.
Well, only one in discussion.
There's only one that's the topic of
Well,
discussion.
we're
The other
currently
one, I
working
think,
on
we've-
one of them.
yeah.
Why don't we vote on it, and we'll
Yes.
vote on the other one.
So here, let me get this straight here.
They'll play the take back.
Yeah, the idea is to, I forget exactly how to put it, but deny the waiver because the information submitted was not sufficient, did not demonstrate sufficient public interest or something like.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
To the satisfaction.
Yeah, to the satisfaction of the board. But the board will reconsider the waiver upon submission of the information identified at conditions 2 and 3.
Correct.
So that's, so that ties the denial of the waiver to two conditions which, when the applicant submits the information required, those conditions will then give the board the opportunity to reconsider the waiver.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I don't know what's reconsider, yeah, I don't know what it's reconsider, but
But
Yeah.
the vote,
again, address,
so,
again, consider a waiver request.
right, so the board will consider a similar waiver request upon submission of that information.
Maybe would,
Would or will.
well, would. So then, will suggest that it's definitely going to happen, would
Get this
suggest
debate in the
if they
minutes.
do it, then we would do it. I don't even know what part of speech I'm worried
So,
about.
so procedurally from tonight, how do we want to, do you have a good sense of what we're talking about? I'm
The
thinking,
very end, I will want you to take a look at the final decision to make sure it reflects all of the discussions.
right. What I'm thinking is in order to get us out of here before 10 o'clock tonight,
Good.
you know, rather than trying to wordsmith it all right
Yeah.
now, if we've got a good sense of,
Yeah.
of the direction that we're going, on this band. So basically, we're looking for a vote, a vote on this particular waiver request as, with the changes we've just discussed. And that will be also, that also requires some changes into the conditions that you're in the process of writing.
Correct.
And he's already outlined those.
We've already outlined that.
Yes.
So,
So that's what
So
we're
just
voting on.
one question, if we deny the waiver, doesn't the special approval automatically get denied?
no. No,
Because in the prior discussion, in the prior vote that happened for the West Street, we had two waivers, we denied it, and then the permit was
Church Street.
deemed denied. So I'm just
So
wondering.
the reason is that we have another bite at the apple through definitive subdivision plan
Okay.
process. So we have that ability.
Okay.
If we were at definitive now and it's you waive it or not, that's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, the situations are sufficiently different that, yes, here's a case, more generally speaking, various waivers can be denied without requiring the whole special permit
Got
to
it.
be denied. Quite often, the denial of the waiver might just require the applicant to do some redesign. This is a little bit unusual in that, strictly speaking, without this waiver, the applicant can't build anything here.
Yeah. Okay.
But
No, they can build two houses.
they can build, yeah, right, they can't build the subdivision.
That's right.
So, but here, we're trying to craft this in a way that gives the applicant an opportunity to
Come again.
to change, if in effect, to change the waiver denial into an approval.
Got
An opportunity to try that. So, having said all that, I do believe we have a motion on the floor specific to this waiver.
Yes.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of granting the waiver? Right? Is that what we're voting on?
Yeah, well, I think we aren't granting the waiver, right?
No.
Oh, we
No,
are.
we-
No, no, well, the,
My head hurts.
well,
This is really,
yeah, let me correct that. I believe the motion was to deny the waiver with the language
We've discussed.
we've
Yes.
discussed.
yes. Okay,
Right, deny the waiver with the language
So
we've
the
discussed.
the motion is to deny,
yes.
So,
as
Okay,
discussed.
that's now, that's why I was,
all right.
I was
Okay.
confused as well.
I suppose if you voted against the motion, you could be, voting against the motion does not commit you to
That's
voting
correct.
in favor
It
of or
doesn't, it
against
does
the
not
waiver.
approve the waiver. You have to have,
It neither approves nor denies the waiver,
right, you need another,
because you could
Action.
also deny it without the language that we talked about.
or do not.
So, in favor of the motion to deny with, in effect, to deny with conditions.
Aye.
aye.
You're denying the waiver.
Again, opposed to the motion. That sounds like a unanimous vote here. Do we have to take, no, we don't have to take a roll call on this.
If you can declare that it's
I
unanimous
can
and there's
declare
no
that it's
objection,
unanimous.
and there's no objection
Without
from any of the, voters, then
Yes,
I think that that's adequate.
all right, so.
All right, I move that we deny the second waiver, W two, for the.
Second.
For the reasons as.
Yeah.
As,
Yeah.
set down in the draft decision.
Move to second that waiver two be denied with the language as drafted, which basically gives the applicant another bite at the apple
Okay,
when they get the select board to weigh in on streetlights.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. That's right. They'll have to come back on that waiver.
Yes. Yes, basically we said, we're denying this one because, you know, we want the select board's input on the streetlights before we,
That was my idea. When I came on
Yeah.
the board, the planning board was the one that decided about streetlights. But the selectmen are the ones who decide about money for streetlights.
so,
And we had a big, half the streetlights were taken down to save money,
yeah.
short around
I
that
remember
time.
that.
Yeah, including lights on our road.
Yes.
We got about a third of the lights we used to have.
So any further discussion on that motion, on waiver two? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously. Let's see,
I'll move that we find favorably on findings 1 through 20.
20.
Just going by Joe's split here.
With the,
with the changes.
the
Yeah, with the
adjustment in
changes.
F-17.
Yes. Didn't mark that on my sheet.
second,
Moved and seconded that the board find favorably on findings 1 through whatever,
20, I said.
1 through 20? 1 through 20 as drafted with the changes noted. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously.
Let's
Is
not-
more findings.
Let's not go too fast, because when we get to the 1.5.5 requirements, I think we have the 1.5.5
We do.
requirements
Yes.
here somewhere.
This season.
Starting
That's,
at
I want to
27.
be sure,
Yeah.
I want to be sure that
Yeah, so
I
that
vote
starts.
the way I want to vote on,
Yep.
you know, I would like my vote to reflect that I don't like.
So that starts at least with finding 27. So we have,
I will also move that we find favorably on findings 21 through 26.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we find favorably in findings 21 through 26. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously. Moving on, 1.5.5A, F27.
F-27 is saying, you know, the ingress, yeah. Yeah, okay. Is someone going to move that be R rather than R naught?
Do we want to vote on the 1.5.5 findings individually here?
Well, if you recall our conversation in here a little while back, certain things that came up, I'd like my vote to,
Yes.
be better crafted on that.
All right, so,
Motion would be are adequate.
a motion on, okay, I would recognize a motion to find that the vote, that on finding 27, the board find favorably, because favorably means are adequate.
Second.
All right, moved and seconded on finding 27, the
Who moved?
board. Justin?
I did not actually, but I'll so move, make
Oh.
it easy.
I thought I heard someone move,
Did someone second?
I second.
Yeah, second it.
okay. All right. That's right, all I was saying was I would recognize such a motion.
Exactly.
I didn't make the motion. At least in my meetings, the chair doesn't make motions. I've heard some meetings where chairs feel like they can make motions.
The rule I have seen is only if there's no other way to move forward, basically, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, that, sometime, well, we used to have a three-member selectman, and, it was pretty tricky, 'cause one of them was often on vacation for the winter in Florida.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so there is an motion on the floor for finding 27. Any discussion? Hearing none. Those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion is carried by a vote of 4 in favor and 1 against. I don't think we need a roll call on this, but I'd identify that Mr. Hassinger is a vote against.
Yeah, are there any other?
Any other findings 28 through 36, any of them that anybody wishes an individual vote on?
I don't think so.
And perhaps, for convenience, the chair would recognize a motion that the board find favorably in findings 28 through 36. Would someone care to make such
So
a motion?
moved.
And would someone care to second it?
Second.
All right, moved and seconded. The board find favorably findings 28 through 36. Discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously. We've already acted on the waiver requests. We now have,
This is a little odd. Page 10 has record of vote, and then the conditions are afterwards. It's a little odd.
There's two. One is for a special permit.
Oh, yeah, never mind.
special permit and preliminary plan, so, so yes, so the next thing would be
VA, 5A.
5A.
I'll move that we approve the special permit.
Second.
With all the
With-
conditions, with the conditions as drafted, with the modifications noted during discussion tonight on the conditions.
So specified by the chair.
Alrighty then, any discussion on the motion for the major residential special permit? Hearing none. I'll call for a roll call vote on that. Mr. Wood,
Aye.
Mr. Hassinger,
Nay.
Mr. Robbins, aye, Mr. Venkar, I'm sorry.
Prabhu.
Prabhu.
Aye.
I need to learn to pronounce your last name without looking at it. Ms. Hassinger.
Aye.
All right, this is approved by a vote of 4 in favor and 1 against. We now have a vote on the preliminary plan with 1 condition.
Because, I'm just trying to think. Part of me would like to, because we denied the waiver, add in a duplicate just because it's preliminary. Duplicate condition, is it even necessary?
Do you say, well, do you say on account of because of the waiver,
Yeah, I mean, basically what my thought was saying that, due to the denial of waiver 1 and the condition, C3, that's why I'm within the conditions for the special permit. I didn't put this in because this is really a clear subdivision standard. Because the special permit, and that's the mechanism by which we're requiring that they provide that plan. We can basically just reiterate that the board approves. Let's just say you voted to approve. Approves the preliminary with the following conditions. One being that they need to come back and that they didn't address the waiver 2 for streetlight. The second, that also they did not address the public or in the request for waiver 1, that the applicant did not adequately address why the waiver was in the public interest, and
no, I think you deny the subdivision plan because it violates one of our rules. It does, and it doesn't have a waiver. I mean,
yeah,
that's all you really have to say.
yeah, that
And
is true.
You could say, oh, by the way, go see condition.
Right.
Mumble or other.
Yeah, I mean, we can absolutely say that. Though, I mean, essentially, that's making the process that the board denies the preliminary because at the time of submission, there was not adequate information to substantiate the waiver request. However, in preparation of the definitive plans, please refer to condition C3. And that, I mean, that's because we're just providing guidance during the preliminary.
Yeah.
I think my sense is you're denying a preliminary plan because it has a fault. This is the fault. You can, and then all you have to do is say, to make it a little easier for people to follow, then say, go see condition whatever about this. And don't get into restating all of it.
So I can write, the board finds that the preliminary plan did not comply with the strict requirements of the subdivision rules and regulations. The applicant may refer to condition C3 for preparation of the definitive subdivision plan.
But so moved
Second.
that we denial with that.
It's a denial with that condition. Moved and seconded that the preliminary plan be denied with the conditions and comments as noted in the draft, as discussed. Whatever. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried
So who
unanimously.
moved and who seconded?
Bob
Justin moved
moved.
and Bob seconded.
Bob moved. I said.
Bob moved and you seconded. Yeah, one way or the other.
So we're done with this,
All right.
right?
Last thing, just a vote of the board to authorize the chair to review the final decision to ensure that it reflects the board's discussion and vote this evening.
So moved. Second. Bob beat you by a millisecond.
Sorry, I zoned out for just a moment, but part of the, it was to authorize,
The chair
The
to
chair.
review and
all right.
You're the chief editor.
All right, so I want to make sure I got the motion. Okay, moved and seconded that the board authorize the chair to review the final decision after the edits made as a result of tonight's discussion. Discussion on that said motion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously.
So we're done with this. Are we having fun yet?
No.
absolutely.
Did
Yeah,
we
well,
just
this-
hear someone from the booth?
I didn't hear a word.
So,
My hearing aids must be off.
This was the one I figured would take us a lot of time.
I don't think
tonight.
what, this one? Or
The
this one?
The one we just got done with.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
All right, so we have
I move we approve this.
action item B, the draft decision for 12 Elm Street.
Dave did send over some edits. Draft 2 that was forwarded to the board incorporated those edits.
We move we approve the decision as drafted in
Second.
draft 2.
All right, moved and seconded that the board approve the decision as drafted as per the latest draft. And that motion implicitly finds favorably on all the findings and approves the conditions noted and approves the modification of special permit and site plan approval. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Declare the motion carried by unanimous vote of all 5 members of the board. And that decision needs no further review or no further editing, other than to fill in the results of the votes. Moving on, we have no discussion items on general business. We've had some bills circulated around. We have
Minutes.
minutes of 3 previous meetings.
I move we approve them.
Dave, did you have any edits?
I had no edits to any of the, I looked at all 3 of them. Now granted, I wasn't here for 2 of the meetings, but I did review the tapes, so
Oh.
I felt that,
Yeah,
as
I
I read
thought they
through the
were pretty
minutes, it seemed consistent with my memory of the tapes. But no, I had no suggested edits to any of these. And if nobody else does, the motion on the floor is to approve the minutes of August 19th, October 28th, and November 4th, all as drafted.
Second.
Yeah, now it's on the floor, yes.
Any discussion of the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Declare that motion carried unanimously. Do we have anything that we need to note tonight by way of a staff report?
Just trying to get things in order. Right now, my last day will be January 10th. I did make arrangements to join you all on January 13th to try to close out those decisions and things. The front office has conducted 3 interviews to date. They have another set scheduled next week as well. So the hope is that we can reduce to the greatest extent as possible any sort of vacancy in position and support of the board. In talking to Tim, I've already lined up that Jeff Walsh will be available to sit here with you on January 27th. We're also in the process of trying to work with a Bill Scanlon from CMRPC to provide some office support. He will be available after the first week of January. So our hope is that really it's just maybe a month, month and a half, but you know, all depends on out of this group whether or not the front office finds someone that is
Interesting. Bill
Good.
Bill Scanlon was at CMRPC for the first many years that I was up there.
Yep.
And he's been working around in different towns doing
Yeah, he's been
planning.
pinch hitting right now in Dudley while their planner is
He's
is
practically a
out.
professional pinch hitter, as far as I can tell.
It's a retirement scheme that I will look forward to someday.
So out of curiosity, Joe, while you're still in this role, have you been involved in the interview process for the new planning members?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
And that's I think probably appropriate because I think the people that have been involved, they need to make sure that they're comfortable with how people are, and at least what I'm told as far as process, once they nail things down to 2 to 3, then they'll also have a second round, bring in someone from planning department to then be part of a final selection. So
That's roughly the way it worked when we hired Joe, that Tim interviewed all the applicants and screened them, narrowed it down to, I think we had maybe as many as 4 or 5 that interviewed at the same time Joe did. And there was a group of us who then participated in the second round of interviews. And when we did that, we all agreed that Joe was the one.
Gee, I'd like to be there in those interviews. I've done that more than once, too. How many planners?
Other thing that's going on, we did get the request for proposals out. It's on the street. We followed up with people that have been contacting the planning office to make sure that they were aware of that. The first step is actually a site walk that's currently scheduled for January 8th, so that's going to be coming up. February 6th would be then a bidders conference where then people would come in, ask questions. Mass Historic, Grafton Historical Commission would be here, all for trying to wrap things up as far as bids being due middle of March. So that's on its way. Also working with the planners that were hired from Mass Development for the town DPW center, the Gateway project. We're reviewing some draft materials, some draft results of the survey materials, to provide them with a little bit of guidance as far as how that January 16th meeting is going to progress, and try to get some input from people that attend. So again, I appreciate, I've seen other people have liked or posted on their own social media streams as far as that event, even if they have a conflict. But if people can make sure that people know about it, that would be great.
Yeah. On that, I did have 2 questions that came in to me from members of the public. Number one, someone was wondering like what the actual grant amount was for that
30,000.
30,000. And this is just for the planning, of course. It's not for any actual development on the site. Is that accurate?
No, so this is just similar to what we did at Worcester Street and up for the North Grafton Transit Village. This is to not only identify what people would like, so getting the input from the public, the surveys, and come up with some concepts. Say if you want to have mixed use, here's what it could look like. If you want to have something else, here's what it could look like. Here's how the whole approach into the common could look like, with a mixture of streetscape, roadway improvements. So it really is to sort of try to get towards a vision of what people would like. It then will require, unless it was a, say, recreational use, it most likely would require some form of zoning. Either village mixed use, and I did point them on to our existing bylaw in case that's appropriate, or something else, entirely. But providing recommendations that the town, the planning board can move forward on in order to, just like we did for the state hospital land, go in front of town meeting to approve changes, because it's R20 right there.
Yep.
So the only thing you could really do is 2 frontage lots, maybe a subdivision road because then you're not going to hit 500 feet on that.
No.
But realistically, there's not a lot you could do under existing zoning unless you wanted to utilize 40B. So anything that's mixed use, you have to change the zoning.
My other question and comment, it's a little different if you have some more to say on that. But I know at least I'm hoping to attend. I've seen at least 2 other members of the board express interest in attending. My commentary to this question is, do we want to put an agenda together because we'll be all in the same place at the same time? Potentially.
So the board can, if you wanted to deliberate and discuss to arrive at some sort of consensus. It's not necessary. This is a public event, and you can relay your own personal thoughts.
That-
Only when the board wants to get together and start discussing things. Hey, we should do this. We should do that. If you want to do stuff like that, you want to meet after, say, next steps, then I'd post. If basically it's like, you know what, we're just not going to talk to each other about this, and at the next meeting you have a debriefing on your regular meeting agenda. That's actually how I'd recommend it.
The reason I thought of that was because I know when we had the National Night Out Select Board themselves made a commentary that because they're going to be all in the same place at the same time and they know it in advance, they need to do that as an agenda. I didn't know if that was accurate or that I
That
heard
may
them
have
say
been
that.
their perception of what they felt they needed to do.
I
It's not
I
legal
think that
requirement.
there's been expanded language in more recent times too
Under the open
around
meeting
that.
law. Yep.
Yeah.
You can speak individually.
Yep.
You can't speak as members of the board. Yeah, I have a meeting at CMRPC at 5:30, and so I may
I'll
make
tell
part of
Janet,
it.
just cancel that.
Depends on how long the Physical Development Committee
Yeah.
spends figuring out how to spend money.
Yeah.
And then hopefully I'll be able to make part of it.
Yeah.
I think Linda wants to go too, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's where being members of the planning board, your residents, you're able to identify your opinion, what you'd like to see. It's just basically any sort of like Dave gets up, says something, you get up, you know what, I agree. Probably gets up, I agree.
If it,
Just recognize that the best thing probably to do is to come back and have it as a debriefing item and, you know, talk amongst yourselves and say, hey, here's some things I really thought was interesting. You know, and to do that in the format of a planning board, a regularly posted planning board meeting.
But if you have ideas that you want to contribute to the,
You should,
Process.
absolutely,
Do
you
it.
should.
you
Yep.
know, not so much, I agree, but, well, how about, you know, what would happen if, or don't you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
That kind of thing should be okay.
Yeah, we've done that before.
Yeah.
And
It
just
did,
for
yeah.
sake of anyone that happens to be watching this meeting, which I don't know if anyone will be, considering there's no public hearings, but I don't know if we said it out loud, but the forum we're talking about particularly is the 16th January, starts at 6:30 p.m. and it's going to be at the One Grafton Common.
Correct.
Is it in the Great Hall?
Yes, it's
It
in the
is in the
Great
Great
Hall.
Hall, yeah.
Yeah, second floor. There's an elevator from the back door.
Yep.
Ready for correspondence?
The only correspondence of note, and this is an annual report that occurs, was from Tufts University regarding an annual parking and demand report.
I had no idea they
I-
had that many employees.
Yeah, that, I wanted to comment on that. I was almost flabbergasted. Cummings School currently employs 457 full-time and 122 part-time faculty and staff on its Grafton campus and has a student population of 441. In addition, they had, at the large and small animal hospitals, they had 98 clients and 50 other visitors a day. blah, 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 blah. They currently identify 963 parking spaces on the campus. And if you go on down, that's distributed among around 35 different lots. So, but some of the lots are a lot bigger than others.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just, we used to talk about who Grafton's largest employer is. Is there anybody bigger than that? I'll bet you Wyman Gordon isn't, it doesn't.
Not anymore.
Wyman Gordon's not that big
No.
anymore. Wyman Gordon used to be in the thousands, several thousand.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Now they're
yeah, 'cause they
pushing.
had 2-3 shifts.
Now they're down to about 350.
So Tufts may be our largest,
Yeah.
I think
Single
it's pretty good.
employer.
I mean, outside of
Outside
town
of
of
the school
Grafton
department.
schools,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
also separated amongst how many different campuses. But
Yep.
this is,
And
And you
any
really
school
wouldn't
that has
know it
more
is.
than a 1-to-1 as far as teacher to student ratio is impressive.
Of course,
Yeah,
the
well,
the
a lot
employees.
of those are doctors and nurses
Of
and whatnot
course.
that take care of patients.
Yes, the term is faculty and staff.
True.
Yeah, and there's research that goes on there also.
Yes, and not all of the faculty are teachers.
no.
Yeah.
And I got to
Can-
yesterday be reminded of the service they do provide as I brought both dogs because we didn't know whether the second dog got into chocolate, but the first one absolutely did. And go there to get
Is there something they actually do? I know you're not, I know it's bad it's supposed to be bad for the dogs.
Oh, they those Lindt chocolates, they're so good. But when they're the dark chocolate and there's like 6 of those wrappers on the floor,
Oh, dear.
it's a trip to the vet.
Yeah, no, but is
And-
there something, is treatment that they give?
To get them to throw up, yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
They-
okay.
Because it had been so soon, easiest thing is to do that, so
Yep.
they're fine.
Do they give that
One
chocolate
didn't
stuff?
get any, but the other got it all, including wrappers that were inside. So, so the value of Tufts Veterinary Hospital is I'm sure many people have experienced it, and I experienced it last night.
Yep.
Number 5.
Any reports from planning board representatives on town committees and CMRPC?
No.
I've, the library, the interesting thing is the library. They're, I think, maybe it was today,
Today
they started tearing down
the old staff.
the stacks.
New edition.
The pictures on social media of the
Yep.
machine, and now there's a whole,
Yep.
one whole
From
thing.
from right near the base all the way up to the roof on one
Right.
side.
And there's some pictures now on the appropriate website that shows a lot of the inside. They did a lot of preparation inside before they started that, of course, and sealed off the part we're keeping from the part that they're taking away. So
So the
that's
op-
something.
That's something. The Open Space and Recreation Plan Committee is expecting to have completed the update to the Open Space and Recreation Plan. The committee is hoping to meet maybe the first full week of January to review the final product and approve it. And one of the things that will happen is the final draft of the Open Space and Recreation Plan will then come to this board, among other boards, for review and comment.
All
And
that's,
approval, I think.
all that said, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded that this meeting be adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?